All right.
Okay, here we are with another episode of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee cup, got my little drink, and I'm here also with another outstanding guest, friend, colleague, Hawkeye. Always nice to have a Hawkeye in the house. Mary Cohen. Mary, we've been doing these coffee talks as a way to introduce people to all the people that are part of our WPC network family, because we want people to know about the great work, the interesting work, the powerful work they're doing in the different places that they operate in. So let's get started by just asking you, can you introduce yourself and tell us what is the work you do?
Be happy to, Eddie. Thank you so much for this invitation. My name is Mary Cohen. As Eddie said, I am a professor at the University of Iowa, go Hawkeyes, in music education, area head. I've been at Iowa since 2007. My research area is music making and well-being with a focus of music in prisons. I began a choir at the Oakdale prison in 2009. This prison is commonly known as Oakdale, but it's officially the Iowa Medical and Classification Center. The chorus began with 22 men in the prison or inside singers and 22 outside singers, some students, faculty, and staff from the university. And each season it's grown. This past semester we had 37 inside singers and 55 outside singers, with a large portion, maybe about 16 of those outside singers student a course I taught called Peace Building, Singing, and Writing in a Prison Choir. So that's been my creative scholarship and research. At the university, I teach students who are going to be music teachers. So these are undergraduate music majors. Sometimes we have post-bachelor students, and then we have graduate program. So I think the point that I'm going to start with that relates the most to WPC is a complete overhaul of a graduate course I taught this past spring, Foundations of Music Education, because this is a course that teaches students about basically the North American context of music education in the history and philosophy, with content about how to do philosophical inquiry and understanding how to do historical research. And basically, when I've taken this class, Eddie, as a graduate student at the University of Kansas, where I went to school, and teaching it at Iowa, previously to this semester, I've taught it from a white music perspective. And it became so clear to me in preparing for this current spring semester that this got to change. There is a lot of deep-seated problems in North America, in the United States, and music education has been there's been a lot of problems with music education as well. So what I did was I introduced a new book. This is the book that we use. It's been published actually since 2012. It's called The Black Child Savers, Racial Democracy and Juvenile Justice by historian Jeff Ward. Are you familiar with it, Eddie?
I am not.
Do you know this book, Eddie?
I don't.
Oh my gosh, this book, it's amazing. What it does is it talks about the history of Jim Crow juvenile justice. And my students and me, this was actually part of my research for a book I'm writing about music education in prisons. At one point, this book was going to also include content about youth, system-impacted youth. And then as I was researching that part of the book, I realized that is its own book. The history and the human rights issues with youth that are system impacted is still such a big topic. So anyway, coming back to this class, this book really opened up the eyes of the students in the class. There is content, white students did not learn this history. So digging into the history and then comparing it to what was happening in music education, it's an ongoing challenge. The students have really needed to dig in. Like the image, and do you know who George Stinney was?
No.
Does that name sound familiar to you? This man, young boy, 14 years old, his image is here in the book. I'm going to forward it to you and show it to you on this picture. There he is, George Stinney, 14-year-old boy who was executed in South Carolina. This is the history that our music teachers need to know about. And so one of the things we did at the end of this semester was I showed a very short video. And it would be a great one if you can include it at some point in your Coffee Talk series. And it's from Brian Stevenson's website. When you click the link for racial justice, he has about a 3 or 4 minute video where he talks about the need for reparations, the need for reconciliation. And actually on that video, one of the images he shows is that image I just showed you of George Stinney. So I think it's difficult, and we need to, right now, if COVID-19, I think this is this time that we need to be leaning into the discomfort. Whites are, and I know you've been working on this for your career, and the people that have been attending this conference more than likely have been doing this, but there are a lot of whites that I know that have not yet leaned into the discomfort as much as they need to. And to me, it's this, I like to call it a new virus that has entered our atmosphere that we need to learn how to engage with. It is magnifying issues that we need to think about. It is completely opening up, and I bet that we had with other people. Have we talked about that already with other folks about how our inequities in our country have really been magnified through what this virus is teaching us? If we can just learn to listen and realize it and recognize it, and like I said, lean into the history of, people need to know what has happened in our country. So that's one thing I've done this semester.
So
there's so much more.
Mary, can you tell me, how did this happen? Did you grow up thinking someday I want to be bringing music to the prisons and doing the kind of work you're doing in reference to music education, to open it up, to broaden the minds of students? How did you get to this place?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of different elements to the story. Growing up, when I was in high school, I was on the debate team, and I remember that my sophomore year, the first year on the debate team, the topic was criminal court procedure, and I remember thinking how illogical it is to put a lot of people together in one space without any kind of an educational program for them. So that was just a seed in the back of my mind. And as I was growing up, I graduated from high school in '86. I graduated from undergraduate in '92. This was all the time of leading toward where we are with mass incarceration. And I wasn't aware of any of these issues. It really, but musically, another little element of it is I grew up playing piano. I was never someone that was in the choir or in the band or in the orchestra. I always was accompanying someone else. I was also a musician for a church. So I really loved doing music for worship and having music be something that's functional. It's providing a space to allow people to experience some aspect of life in a deeper way, like music for funerals, music for weddings, etc. So anyway, I was living in Kansas City, and a friend of my husband and I were in a choir called the Festival Singers of Kansas City, and a lot of friends in that choir were involved in this organization that was called Arts in Prison, which started with a choir called the East Hill Singers. So one Sunday, it was January of 2002, I think, I was reading the local paper, the Kansas City Arts section, and saw that this East Hill Singers were performing a few miles from our house where we lived in the Kansas City area, and I just was curious, so I went to the concert, blown away that someone would have the vision of going into a prison, because this particular choir has a group of men who are incarcerated, men that are incarcerated sing with a group of men from the community. So here we have this interesting kind of symbolism of people accused of committing crimes singing in harmony and youth society. So that definitely planted a seed. And then in 2003, when I decided to go to the University of Kansas for my PhD, I was able to go with Elvira Voth to the prison on a regular basis to watch what she did and to data collection and really learn what this is about. So when I came to Iowa in 2007, I did a lot of research to support the plan of beginning the choir. And it was so interesting because at that point, nobody knew the word restorative justice. I would say it and people would be like, what's that? I was like, have you ever heard of it? Nobody had heard of it. So between really 2007 and now, where Van Jones, for example, at one point, I don't know if it's still going on, but he had a reality show about restorative justice on CNN. And now, you know, even the peace building class, we read Howard Zier's little book of restorative justice, and even some of the men in the prison didn't really understand what it was. So there's still a lot, like white privilege and learning about racial justice, there's still a lot of learning that needs to happen. But at least at this point, when I say this, it's not like a foreign term to most people. So in that, 12-year time period, that's a pretty short time period for that much awareness, I think.
Yeah. So can you just define for us, for those who may not know what restorative justice is, how would you break that down or define that to folks when you talk to folks to get them to understand that or get them, you know, thinking about that or wanting to know and learn more about it?
Sure. So restorative justice is a system for, it's an idea of healing harm. And one way to imagine it is in our current US criminal, what's the right term to say, criminal legal system, a person is accused of committing a crime, and it's the question that's asked is, and this can happen in any kind of conflict management situation, when the question that's asked, the default question for a lot of people is, what harm has been committed? I said it wrong. The default question is, who committed the crime and how should that person be punished? Already in my default position, I was in the other space. The restorative justice question is, what harm has been committed and how can the harm be healed? So the criminal legal approach is very deficit based and not looking at the authenticity and the realness of what's happened. And restorative justice approach is saying, hey, not only has a harm been occurred to this particular survivor of the crime, but there's also been harm to these other people in the community. And the perpetrator of the crime also has experienced some harm. So it's a deeper question trying to figure out how to heal those harms. And restorative justice is used now in lots of different contexts. It's used in schools, it's used in workplaces, it's used in, and you may have heard of this concept of a peace building circle, or even they call them restorative justice circles. There's a lot of different terms, and there are mediators that learn how to facilitate these circles, and they really allow for accountability, because that's what's missing in the criminal legal system, is there's not an opportunity for whoever that perpetrator was to really look at the harm that that person's committed and not only try to heal that harm, but to be accountable. Because when you're in that kind of a circle, the potential, if it's facilitated well, is there's a potential for whoever that perpetrator is to have basically realized that, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that whatever they did has impacted the survivor, the survivor's parents or children or family members or other people in the community. So it's basically a more progressive way of looking at conflict management. And it's not new. Native American wisdom, Native Americans have practiced forms of restorative justice for thousands of years.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of another, I mean, I shouldn't say this, I haven't done the research on this piece, but to what extent is there a relationship between white privilege and the criminal legal system? I mean, we all know that there's some of that, but how could an approach of looking at Native American wisdom and restorative justice practices relate to some of the same goals that you have with the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I think about what really you've resonated for me is when people see people that commit crimes, and usually these people seeing them, meaning in the courts, in the juries, attorneys, are usually majority white folks, that when the assessment of the crime is taken care of, whatever that is, trial or plea bargain, it's how do we punish?
Mhm.
And what you're saying is now there is possibly, and has been for thousands of years, is how do we heal?
Yeah,
Now,
right. And that's,
I was going to ask you,
go ahead.
um, what's your sense over these 13 plus years, the reception to that? I mean, has it been effective in the ways you've looked at it, seen it? I can see it in a school, right? I can maybe see it in a schoolyard playground situation. But when you're talking about murder, I mean, these are the questions I'm imagining someone's asking you. You're saying heal from a murder? So what's your sense of the reception of restorative justice? You've talked about the word kind of expanding more in society, getting familiar with it. But what's your sense of how people are feeling about the effectiveness of this process?
I think that when it is used, it's remarkable how people are awakened and enlightened to its value. You mentioned the crime of murder. I'm just quickly looking on my phone. There is an organization that began fairly recently called Common Justice. Do I have it right? I have it right. I should probably get back to you for sure on it, but there's a program in Brooklyn, New York that has kind of an alternative to prison and kind of this, I'm going to need to look this up a little bit more, but healing approach, like a restorative justice approach for people who have committed murder and other crimes like that. And I mean, in general, sure, let me come back to the right screen. Sorry, I shifted to a different screen to look that up for you. I had the book, actually had a book that describes all of this, and it's one of the men at Oakdale is reading it, and it's still there. But it's basically like a paradigm shift for people to realize that there is a different way to think about conflict. And what we need really is once people start to see it or see how it can work and see its deeper value, it's amazing. I mean, the healing is so much deeper. I've had panels. I did a listening panel actually a couple years ago with people who were survivors of crime. These were all either parents, or there was one grandfather who had a child who was murdered. Because I have been researching this so much from the perspective of the people that are incarcerated, I wanted to find out, what about survivors of crime? How can I do what I'm doing without causing them any more harm? And everybody's in a different situation. And that's really important to be able to figure out, to have that awareness that there's not going to be one solution that's going to change everything, but to have that space of really knowing that there are other ways of healing, such as a restorative justice type approach. So, I'm coming from someone that's not been through that. And so I mean, forgiveness is such a complex, individualistic experience, but like there's a representative from where was he? From New Hampshire, Rennie Cushing. He he was somebody who had spoken out actively against the death penalty, for example, and even after his father was murdered. And I mean, the idea is, you know, and if you keep having an eye for an eye mentality, everybody's blind. If you have that kind of way of approaching interacting with people where, you know, I don't know, I'm not really speaking as clearly as probably would be helpful right now because I'm a little concerned about, it's such a big topic, Eddie.
Yeah, it is.
It's just that what we need are at least the awareness that there is another option. And then the bigger thing we need is what this author of this peace building book we used this semester, this gentleman, John Paul Lederach, wrote this book called The Moral Imagination, The Art and Soul of Peace Building. And he uses a phrase in here that I think is related to the WPC work. And he calls it critical yeast, that you need to have enough energy behind a new idea that it can actually take hold and make a larger change.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something I'm interested in because there's just so many needs for changes and new ways, new healing approaches to how do we deal with one another, how do we interact with each other. And what's I'd like to say before, because I'm going to have to go here in just a second, but the thing that ties us back to the current new virus that's in our atmosphere is this virus is teaching us all about interconnectedness. My behavior is going to impact someone I don't know. When I realize that and do what I can to care for the people I don't know, that's what we need in this society. It's more than the people, it's also that my behavior will impact the environment. Ever since I've been sheltering in place, I have been so careful about composting, for example. What can I do that is more healing for everything?
Yeah.
And we've got to go deeper. We've got to raise the bar higher for making these kinds of major positive changes. So I congratulate you on bringing these conversations forward. And I just hope people read more. Like, did you know the 1918 flu began at a farm in Kansas, according to some historians? And there's just, there's a lot we need to dig in and read and understand. Be curious. Do not have assumptions about anyone's experience, and use our creativity to think about how we can create more healing spaces for people. Listening. By the way, I want to say one last little bit. That's it. This past spring, our last choir rehearsal in the prison was March 3rd. So we continued along with these virtual rehearsals for just the outside choir members. That we recorded them and sent them to the prison for the men to listen to, and put some recordings for them to practice. But what we did instead of our final concert, we did listening exchange. It was just Friday, and I can send you the link if you want to listen to it. Is that's what we need to figure out how to do better, is to really listen to other people.
Yeah.
Hear what they say.
So Mary, can you just lastly talk about what's in the future? What are you going to continue with the choir? What's some of your ideas about the next 10 years of your work, your life there in Iowa City,
Great.
University, and with the prison?
Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of show and tell with books today. The next show and tell is this book, which is in process. It's called Silence Voices, Music Making in U.S. Prisons by me and my co-author, Stuart Paul Duncan. So it's going to be a 7-chapter book. We have intro through 5, a draft, but we're still revising and getting feedback on it. The last 2 chapters, we've signed a contract with Wilfrid Laurier University Press out of Canada. And so it's going to get done. It's been and we've been working this 7 years. It's going to get done. And it's going to provide a lot of information about what I said regarding restorative justice, a lot of information about thinking in new healing forms of conflict management, and provide music educators some information that, wow, over 100 years ago, there was a music educator in Iowa that led, Warden Sanders was the warden at the Fort Madison prison, and he started a choir, an orchestra, and a band there.
Wow.
So it's not a new thing. It's been around, and I've got a lot of really interesting historical data and stories about it. And so that's going to get done. And then the ideas will filter out through the globe and people will start being nicer to each other.
So can we listen to the choir online? Is there a place and space
Yeah.
to find you and the choir? Can you tell us that before you go?
Absolutely. Yes, you sure can. It's the Oakdale Community Choir website. I will pop it into the chat here if you're able to visit that. And on that website, we have a writing reflection. We have songwriting, so you can access the last handful of concerts. You can access. I'm going to have to get going because my colleague's going to be sitting there waiting for me. You can listen to the last few concerts. You can listen to. You can listen to original songs. We have a number of songs using the Creative Commons license, meaning other people can use the songs. And pretty soon I'll get the link for the listening exchange, where we had Mayor Bruce Teague perform a new version of America the Beautiful. And I'm going to connect you with this man who's put this project together. It's called America the Dream, which has a more inclusive lyrics for America the Beautiful. Yeah. So it's beautiful. And there's a lot of hope. We just got to keep on keeping on. Raise the bar.
Dr. Cohen, we appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time. Keep doing the work you're doing. And Olivia was phenomenal. So thank you for that recommendation as well. So be safe. And we'll post all the resources that you mentioned. And thank you for all the good work you're doing.
Great. I'm going to connect you with Steve, the man who's the founder of this America the Dream. It's really building a lot of energy, and I think you'd really like to learn what he's doing based on a lot of the work of Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
All right, Eddie.
Appreciate you, Mary.
Bye.
Bye-bye.